Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 110, with today's guest, Michael Port.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
My name's Adam Franklin, and you are listening to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. It is the show for people who love marketing on the web, and today I am super thrilled to have Michael Port on the show. I'll introduce him shortly, but just know that you'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments where we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We confess what's failed, and we reveal the truth about what really works. The show is brought to you by our book, which is also called Web Marketing That Works, and the gift for you, our listener, are the 33 free marketing templates that come with the book. So if you would like to get your hands on those, please head over to bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Okay, so Michael Port. Now, if you don't know Michael, he is a New York Times best-selling author of 6 books, including the classic book, Book Yourself Solid, as well as the new book, Steal the Show. The accolades about Michael are thick and fast, whether it's him as an author. He's been described as an uncommonly honest author. President of Starbucks said that his latest book, Steal the Show, might be the most unique and practical book ever written on the topic of public speaking. Lewis Howes calls him the best public speaking coach in the world, and Jason Gaynard, the founder of the Mastermind Talks, declares Michael Port the best speaker he's seen. He has also been a professional actor and has starred on popular shows like Sex and the City, Law and Order, and also in films like The Pelican Brief and Down to Earth. These days, Michael can be seen on the telly, on CNBC, PBS, and MSNBC as an on-air expert in communications and business development. And also, he has his own very popular podcast on public speaking and performance, and it is called Steal the Show with Michael Port. Now, that's a huge introduction. He's a huge guest. Me, personally, I've been a student of his work for many years. I've read his book. I've watched his videos. He's fantastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed this show. So let's get over to the action. Michael Port, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, let's get straight into this. There's something in your book, Steal the Show. You've said that you rehearsed 400 hours for your Thinking Big Revolution keynote. Now, what does that actually look like? 400 hours I worked out to be 2.4 weeks. Obviously, you didn't do it in one hit, but that's the equivalent of 2.4 weeks all day, every day, rehearsing one keynote. Talk us through that.
Actually, if you put it in those terms, it really doesn't seem like that much. 2.4 weeks is not a very long period of time. You'd have to drink a lot of coffee, I suppose, to stay up straight through. But it really does surprise people when they hear that number. It sounds so extreme. But if you think about the amount of rehearsal you do for a play, 400 hours doesn't even come close. If you think about the number of hours you practice for competitive sports, 400 hours is a small number. So for the average person who rarely gives speeches, and once in a while they need to give a speech, I'm not suggesting that 400 hours of rehearsal time is appropriate. However, what I am suggesting is that the importance of the speech should be, or the amount of rehearsal that you do based on the importance of a speech is proportionate. So if it's not a very important speech or presentation, you don't spend a lot of time rehearsing. But if the stakes are very high, then you just want to do more rehearsal than you're doing now. And I'm not asking for 400, but I'm suggesting more rehearsal than you do now. You think about life, it's made up of lots of high-stakes situations. And how you perform during those high-stakes situations will determine the quality of your life. And if your performance is flat, well, then not much happens. But if your performance is exceptional, if you steal the show when the spotlight's on you, well, then you play a really big game. And a lot of people resist rehearsal because they've tried it, and as a result, they felt stiff when they were actually presenting. And this is not uncommon. This is, in fact, very common. And the reason that they felt stiff is likely because when they were performing, they were trying to recall what they did in rehearsal. And as a result, they weren't in the moment when they were performing. So they seemed disconnected and a little bit stiff. They weren't able to be authentic. And ease and comfort and natural behavior is authentic in performance. And so what's surprising is that the better prepared you are, the more rehearsed you are, the more authentic you can be when you're performing because you can be in the moment. So the stiffness and the discomfort comes from only a little bit of rehearsal because it's not yet ingrained in you. So you're trying to recall what you did in rehearsal. However, if you do a lot of rehearsal, it's ingrained in you. Your material is now part of you. You don't have to work to recall it. So it can come to you organically in the moment. And when you are well prepared and you know how to improvise, then you can be spontaneous in the moment. And that's what's most compelling. And so people who have mastered something have put a lot of time into their performances. And when we work with A-listers, people who are already making $20,000, $30,000 a speech, every single one of them that we have ever worked with, is it to a T, is that the expression? To a number, to a T, to the end, to the individual, to the person, they've all said the same thing. I don't rehearse enough. I can pull it off because I can wing it, but I know I could be a lot better. I just don't know how to rehearse. And of course they don't, because it's not something that you learn going to business school. It's not something you learned in college unless you were an actor. And so I have a master's from NYU, the graduate acting program at NYU, and we were taught how to rehearse. This is something that we did as professionals. And so one of the reasons that I am bringing what the actor knows about performance to the public speaker is because those kinds of techniques allow you to be a better public speaker. So in Steal the Show, chapter that is specifically dedicated to rehearsal and how to do it.
What are some of the things a first-time speaker should be doing to learn from your acting experience and to practice this rehearsal?
So the way that I start Steal the Show is by focusing on the performer's mindset, because performers see the world in a particular way. And if we don't have a performer's mindset, then the principles of performance and the techniques that one uses to perform are not as effective. So first we focus on the performer's mindset. Then I teach the performance principles in part 2 of Steal the Show. And then part 3 is a tour de force on public speaking. It is a masterclass in public speaking and the techniques that you need to learn in order to give great speeches. So when you look at the mindset of a performer, a performer knows how to play the right role in virtually every situation. They know that they are more than one thing. They see the world as a big place, so they can step into other people's shoes. And they also understand that there isn't a difference between performance on stage and off. When you walk on stage, you don't all of a sudden behave differently. And performance is part of all aspects of life. A job interview is a performance. A negotiation is a performance. An interview like this is a performance. I'm not singing and dancing, but I have an agenda. And my agenda is to serve your audience. And in order to serve your audience, I have to perform. I have to really understand what is relevant to them and try to deliver on that. So I have an objective. My objective is to help them be better performers. Well, then what I do is I try every tactic I can possibly think of to reach them. That's performance. Bad performance would be manufactured behavior. Coming on here and going, well, hey, how are you? Great to be here. So happy, all of a sudden, playing at this idea of somebody who is supposed to be alive and big energy on an interview. It would be inauthentic. But good performance is authentic behavior in a manufactured environment. And this situation, the job interview, the negotiation, the sales pitch, even meeting your future in-laws for the first time is manufactured. Those are situations that produce stress. They are situations that are often uncomfortable because you're not in control of it. You go in for a job interview and there's a bunch of people sitting across the table from you and they're asking you questions that you are supposed to answer in a way that will prove to them that you should have the job. Well, that's pretty manufactured. So how do we go into those environments authentically? And the better prepared we are, the more authentic we can be because we are not searching for answers. We're not struggling to deliver on our promise. Then I focus on silencing the critics and crushing your fears. Because, of course, we know that public speaking can be very anxiety-provoking. Even for people who want to be professionals, it's anxiety-provoking. And that's okay. That's completely normal. But I think that it's overblown, this myth that public speaking is the number one fear and death is the number two fear. I just don't buy that. Think about it. If you were on the edge of a cliff and the cliff was 1,000 feet above a rocky ground, and I said to you, listen, you've got two choices right now. You can either give a 5-minute speech to people that actually want to hear what you have to say, or I'll push you off the edge of the cliff and you'll die. I think you'd probably give the speech. I don't think you'd say, I'd rather die and actually die. You may say, you know what, I'd rather die than giving a speech. But when it, push comes to shove, you don't actually mean that. And why are we so afraid of speaking? Well, we're afraid of getting rejected. We're afraid of being criticized. And I get that. That makes perfect sense to me. I do not want to be rejected. I do not want to be criticized. But those things are part of life. We will get rejected and we will get criticized. And the bigger game we play, the more criticized we will be, likely. So the people who are best known in the entire world are the most criticized people in the entire world, and they are the most appreciated people in the entire world, both. Now, of course, I'm not referring to infamous people. I don't think many of them are particularly liked, but I think you get my point that, you can be a famous rock star. I love Dave Matthews. I'm a huge Dave Matthews fan, but there are definitely people out there who don't resonate with Dave Matthews. And what happens is we become critics. And I think that you can't be a performer and a critic. I think you can be one or the other. I think if you spend your time criticizing and putting others down and spending a lot of time talking about what you don't like, it's hard to be a performer because then when you go out in the world and try to perform, you know what's coming back at you. You don't see a lot of film critics also directing films. You don't see a lot of art critics actually making art. Now, there's a place for, critics. There's a place for all of that. But getting feedback from a friend, getting feedback from a coach, getting feedback from a supporter that is designed to help you do big things in the world is very different than the old constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is just criticism dressed up as constructive criticism. It's still something that is meant to give you a little poke. So usually when someone starts out by saying, listen, let me give you some constructive criticism, my suggestion is say, thank you, but no. Because I've never had a great mentor or a great coach start out with, let me give you some constructive criticism. A great mentor, a great coach, a great friend, a great supporter will say to you, I love what you're doing here. And I have an idea of how it can be even better. Would you like to hear it? And then, of course, you say, yeah, I'd love to hear it. How can I be better? And that's a very, very different way of engaging with the world. And so there are two types of critics. There's the internal critic and the external critic. And the external critic is the critic we've been talking about. They're the people in the cheap seats who like to push other people down. Then there's the internal critic. Those are the critics in your head. Those are the voices in your head that tell you you're not enough, you don't know enough, you'll never be enough. And when those voices are loud, then the external critics, the people in the cheap seats, they're even louder. We hear them even more because we question ourselves. We doubt ourselves. But the performer's mindset is one with little doubt. That doesn't mean that you are arrogant or that you are always right or that you know exactly what you're doing all the time. No, it means that you believe in yourself and that you are willing to do the work it takes to reach other people, to connect with other people, to get them to think differently, to feel differently, to do something different. That's what helps silence these voices in our head. And when the voices in our head are quiet, we don't hear those external critics quite so much. In fact, they don't really bother us that much. When I first started writing books in 2005, I could not read a bad review without thinking about it for the next 24 hours. I could get 100 great reviews, one bad review, and all I could think about was the bad review. Well, that's a really crappy way to live. That's all about getting approval rather than focusing on results. But we need to ask ourselves, what's more important to us, results or approval? And if it's approval, then most of the actions we take will be small because we'll pander, we'll play it safe, we'll make sure we don't ruffle any feathers. But if we go for results and we're clear on what kind of results we want to go after, then we'll take risks to get there. Then we'll play a bigger game. Then we'll put ourselves on the line. Then we'll be willing to express ourselves. And if we get some criticism, we'll be okay with it. Sometimes we can learn from it, even if it's really mean, that even meaner than constructive criticism, if we don't let it negatively affect us. But we don't have to listen to it. Like I said before, we can say, no, thanks, that's okay. But when I get a review from somebody on Amazon who says they want to slap me, I don't really worry too much about that. I mean, I guess I'd worry about it if I was in the same room with them. But on Amazon, I wouldn't really worry about it. And in fact, I write back to people who write bad reviews now. And the performer's okay with that. Performer goes, okay, that's not my job. My job is not to obsess on the negative, views of others. My job is to create, to build, to produce. And when you have that mindset, then you can start looking at what are the performer's principles? What principles does a performer adhere to? And there are 6 of them. And once you adopt those particular principles, then you can start looking at the technique that you need to master in order to perform well when you're in front of others.
In the book, I loved how you talk about behaving as if. So even if you aren't totally confident on stage, act as if you were. Or if you're not totally excited to be taking the stage because it's a little bit of nerves, a little bit of butterflies, act as if. And you grow into it and you visualize the performance and everything else. Talk to me about once you've rehearsed, you're ready to go, you're excited, and it's 10 minutes before an MC is about to introduce you. What's going through your head then, and what should you be focusing on?
So the principle of acting as if is one of those 6 principles in part 2 of Steal the Show. And it is an actor's best friend because an actor, when they're trying to create characters, needs to act as if they are that person in that time, at that age, in that situation. And if they can't act as if, then they can't step outside of their own disclosive space. And a disclosive space is the space that they disclose just around them. And when we want to think bigger, we need to disclose a lot bigger space. And that's what acting as if does for you. And that's why I bring it to the non-actor to say, can you act as if you are in a different situation, as if you feel comfortable playing this role that you've been asked to play, say, by your boss, or the role that you need to play as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a negotiator, as a salesperson. These are all different roles that you play. And each role requires a slightly different way of being based on your personality. And when you are about to go in front of others, if you're well prepared, and if you've done this acting as if work throughout rehearsal, there's not that much that you need to do right before you go on stage, because you know what your objective is and you pursue that objective. And that's another actor's technique. And it's one of the principles in part 2, and it's about pursuing objectives. So when you give a speech is not about you. It's never about you. It's always about the audience. Always. When it's about you, the audience disconnects. When the stories you tell are stories that you like to tell because you like how it makes you look, or it's cathartic to tell that story, then it generally doesn't connect with the audience. However, if you tell a story because it needs to be told in order to deliver on the promise that you're making to the audience, well, then that's a connected story. And before you go on stage, if you've already done the work around choosing your objectives and the different tactics you will use to achieve those objectives, and the tactics you'll use in a speech will be the kind of content that you introduce, the stories that you use, the structure that you choose, the way that you prod them, the audience interaction techniques, all of the different technical elements of a great speech, well, then you're quite relaxed. You're quite at ease, and you go out there and just pursue those. I'm in a Facebook group of professional speakers, and one of the fellows asked about getting into the right state of being, when he gives a speech. He said, sometimes I have trouble doing that. Like I'm not in the mood or in a state of being. I don't know how to get there, the right energy and pump myself up, etc. And a number of people offered a number of different comments that were about trying to put yourself in a particular state of being. And I think that there may be some value in that. The actor, the trained actor, doesn't need to do that, interestingly enough. And I think when you have the skill that a trained actor does as a speaker, and you don't need to be a professional speaker and you don't need to train as an actor to learn it, but when you do learn it, then you don't have to worry about putting yourself in that state, because here's what happens. When you pursue an objective and you pursue it fully, meaning you do everything in your power to pursue that objective, and that's delivering on the promise for the audience, that influences your state of being, the way that you behave. And the way that you behave influences the way you feel, which influences your state of being. And of course, the way that you behave influences the way the audience feels, and that changes their state of being. But if you manufacture a state of being, then it doesn't necessarily influence the audience. It's just a state of being you're in. Just like, think about your everyday life. If you're in a great mood and somebody else is in a bad mood, your great mood is not necessarily going to change their bad mood just because you're in a great mood. It's what you do that will affect them and potentially change their mood. And of course, that continues to keep you in a great mood because you've had a positive effect on someone else. So it's what we do. So for example, if I'm in a bad mood when I'm going to the airport, which I often am because I don't love traveling and I get a little grumpy. It's a long drive to the airport and you gotta, get there in time, and then there's a line and you gotta, the whole thing. So I'm a little grumpy. What I do specifically to get out of that is I try to talk to as many people as I can. I try to make the TSA people laugh. I try to make friends with people in the lines, because as soon as I do that, I lose that bad mood. All of a sudden, I'm in a different place physically, emotionally, energetically, because I'm trying to influence other people. And that changes the way I feel. And that's a technique that you can use on stage, so you never have to pump yourself up or produce a manufactured experience. My partner, Amy, and I were sitting down to do a podcast last week for our podcast, Steal the Show. And she's also my bride. We're to be married in 27 days, which is really exciting. But that's assuming she shows up. Hopefully she'll be there. I'm crossing my fingers that she'll be there.
Me too.
Yeah, thank you. And we were sitting down to do this podcast, and it was very early in the morning. We had a big day ahead of us. We had a long night before. We were just kind of pooped, and neither of us were particularly energetic or chatty. As soon as that recording went on, bam, We were there. We were on. We were connected because we were pursuing an objective. We knew what we were teaching in that podcast that day. We connected with each other. We connected with the audience. And afterwards, we felt great. And Amy said, you know, Michael, I think anytime we're a little grumpy, we should do a podcast. Because performing changes your state of being, in part because we have no choice. I can't show up on this podcast or any other podcast and be like, yo, what's up? What do you want? Okay. All right, listen, you can go and try to speak. Most of you are going to suck. But, could you imagine if that's how someone showed up to do a podcast because they were in a bad mood? No, you change your state of being as soon as you're trying to influence other people in a positive way. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It really does. It's the energy that I guess you give and that you receive and the impact that you're having on others that can put you in that, not the state, but make you in the zone.
Yeah. And then it allows you to be in the moment, which is another one of those 6 principles in the second part of Steal the Show, is that in the moment is where the magic happens. What you do in rehearsal ultimately doesn't matter because nobody saw it. You have the best performance in the world in your living room, but if you do not deliver in the moment on the day, it doesn't matter. You can't say to the audience, oh, you know what? I'm so sorry I sucked. I was really great in my living room last Tuesday. I wish you saw that one. It doesn't work that way. Film is great because they can just cut the heck out of it. And, you can take not such a great performance and turn it into something that, is pretty compelling. You can also ruin a great performance if it's not edited well, but that's something else entirely. So when you're performing live, meaning giving a speech or doing an interview or negotiating or meeting somebody or going to a networking event or anything like that, what only matters is what you're doing in that moment. So can you stay in the moment? Instead of, when you make a mistake, which will happen, it will happen. I fell off a stage once into the orchestra pit. I've tripped over lights. I've stumbled over my words. I have even one time at an event, huge event, I used the wrong name of the company. I called it a different company in the same industry. I had to recover from that. So we will make mistakes and we'll make them often. But if we obsess on them, then we are not in the moment because we are back. We are back when we made that mistake. And if we are hyper concerned about what's coming, then we're not in the moment because we're obsessing on the future. And if we don't know our material well, then generally we're trying to think in advance, what's next, while we are trying to stay in the moment. And that's a very difficult place to be. So again, this is why preparation is important. If you need your slides to know where you are in your presentation, and it's a presentation that you give regularly or plan on giving regularly, then it might behoove you to do some more rehearsal. And in fact, slides, visuals are things that we add after we've created the content, not before. However, generally the way that somebody produces a speech that they need to give for business purposes is they sit down at their computer and they open up PowerPoint or Keynote and they create a slide deck. And then they use that slide deck as an outline and they go through in their head a few times what they're going to say. And they say, well, I use my slide deck as an outline. Then they get there to give their presentation and there's no projector, or it breaks, or in the middle it goes down, and they feel lost, completely lost, because they're not prepared. They can't deliver without those slides. So the slides are something that we put in, afterwards. If you use them, I very rarely use visuals. However, when I do, it's because it will help make a connection emotionally or intellectually with an audience. I'll use video from time to time, and I also use a lot of audio, which is unusual. I even have conversations with people via the speakers in front of an audience, which is very unusual. And it produces a theatrical experience that people love and a teaching experience at the same time, so that I'm showing them the point that I'm trying to make rather than just telling them. I can't really do that here. I have to use only my words because I haven't given you a script. But if I'm giving a speech, I can actually create an entire scene using the voices of other people and using my voices and having conversations just like you would see if you were watching a play. It really makes it quite fun.
I've seen your presentations like that, and it was amazing.
Thank you. That's so nice to say. I love that. Thank you. And that's, for something like that, that's one of the reasons rehearsal is really important, because there are technical elements that you need to concern yourself with. Now, if all that technology goes out, I have prepared so that I can do something different, but hopefully still as impactful. Because obviously, if the technology goes out, that scene's not going to work. So I have to still be able to deliver even if the technology goes out. So that's another thing that we do. And, look, here's the thing. None of this is perfect. This is a creative process. Perfection does not exist. There are lots and lots of things that I know I need to improve when I finish a presentation. And then hopefully I go work on them. And then those things are better the next time. And then I find something else that needs improvement. Or, I just am off a little bit in a particular section of a speech because I wasn't in the moment, or I wasn't pursuing my objective strong enough, or I wasn't making big enough choices so that I wasn't raising the stakes. I was playing it a little bit safe because, I didn't want to ruffle any feathers. Those are the kinds of things that will diminish the power of a presentation. And I still make those mistakes from time to time because I think it's completely normal. It's a creative process. It's an artistic process. And here's the other thing that's interesting. I heard Ira Glass, the NPR host, talking about the creative process and how difficult it is when you first start. And he said, when you first start pursuing a creative process, your taste exceeds your ability. So what you want to make is not what you're able to make. So you get frustrated because you think, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. It's not working because your taste is so good. That's where the rehearsal comes in. That's where the hours come in. That's where the time helps you develop enough skill so that what you're making is equal to your taste. But if you are really interested in mastery, your taste will always be a little bit better than what you're able to produce. And you keep working toward that.
And that's part of the fun of refining and improving the craft.
Yeah, that's right. And look, here's the other thing that the performer knows, and this is part of the performer's mindset, going back to part one. The performer knows that rehearsal is messy, that it's often ugly, that 90% of the time what you're doing in rehearsal is not working. That's the point of rehearsal. A lot of times when somebody comes and starts working in one of our master classes, or they come to one of our events or our graduate program, we have a graduate level training where people enroll for 4 months at a time. And then for 4 days a month, they come and work with us in a group because it takes a while to produce a great speech. At first, sometimes they get frustrated in rehearsal because it's not perfect. And so they don't want to do it. They don't want to rehearse because they don't like the feeling of performing something that isn't working. And then they stop. But what the performer knows is that that's the process, and they're completely fine with it. And all the other performers know when they're watching somebody rehearse that it's not necessarily going to be perfect. And they don't judge that person harshly because they're performers. They're not critics. And so it's a real mind shift, mindset change that our students are able to make. And it makes it so much easier for them to do the work. They're so much more relaxed about it, have so much more fun with it, because why should it be a painful process? Why should it hurt so much? If you want to give speeches and then you go give speeches and you're traumatized the whole time and you don't like doing it, I don't get it. I'm sort of at a loss for words. Why would you do it? So can we have fun with it? Can we make it fun? I think we can.
Michael, how does a performer reenact that sensation of the butterflies when they're rehearsing?
They bring in invited guests. It's one of the steps in the rehearsal process. You get to the certain point in your rehearsal process where you bring in guests. And these are guests that you usually know. They are not judgmental guests. They are not people who will get in your way. They are supportive people. And one of the things that we do in Steal the Show and in all of our work is teach our students how to get the kind of feedback that will help them. Because often somebody will see what you're doing and they know whether or not it's working for them, but they don't necessarily know why. So they may tell you what they think you should do, but it may not be on the money. And if you can't translate their feedback, then you may not be able to improve because of it. So, for example, let's say that somebody comes up to you after a speech and they say, or you bring someone in for invited rehearsal and they say, I don't know, I just thought you had way too much energy. Like, I really think you should have brought it down. And you do. You bring it down. And the next time you do it, someone else goes, I don't know. I really thought your energy was kind of low. I think you really should bring up your energy. And you are completely confused. You're like, what am I supposed to do? Well, what we need to do is figure out if the first piece of advice or the second piece of advice, but in this case, the first piece of advice, was actually the right advice for what that person was getting from your presentation. So we need to ask some questions. We need to ask them, okay, so let me ask you some questions to see if I understand. Do you know what the promise of this presentation is? And if they tell you and it's right, you say, okay, good. At least I know they know that. Or what's the big idea that is the through line that supports this whole big promise? And they give you an answer that's it's not exactly what you intended. Well, there's a red flag. Okay. All right. So my big idea is not really clear, which means maybe I'm not delivering a promise because it's the through line that supports the delivery of that promise. It's a through line that supports it throughout the whole presentation. All right. So let me ask them another question. So did you feel that my information was well organized? And if they say, I don't know. I mean, there were parts that I could follow and the others I wasn't so sure. And I think it's because, you had so much energy. And you, if you're now what I would call a trained speaker, because you are able to do this kind of work, you realize, it's not the energy. It's the big idea isn't clear and the organization of the information isn't clear. And as a result, it seems a little bit frenetic because I'm all over the place. So let me first go back and make sure I've got the fundamentals down. Because if I have those fundamentals down and I pursue my objective with passion, then the energy that I bring to it will be powerful and it will be connected to the material that will deliver on the promise and the big idea that supports that promise. And your job is to help them consume that information because ideas are only as good as your audience's ability to consume them. You can bring the greatest ideas to a speech, life-changing, world-altering, mind-bending ideas. But if they can't consume it, then the ideas don't really mean that much. It's like watching a speech and leaving going, my God, that guy was smart. I have no idea what the heck he was talking about, but he's impressive, and then you leave going, well, that's an impressive guy, but nothing has changed for me. You can put someone in the stage who has a limited amount of knowledge, yet they can change the way you see the world because they can help you consume the knowledge or the ideas that you need to make a change.
I like it. Can I ask you a couple of rapid fire questions, Michael?
Absolutely.
So, in your opinion, should you greet people as they're coming into the room or make a big entrance?
It depends. Because this is a creative pursuit and it's an art, there isn't one way to do it. And if you have a teacher that suggests this is always the way you should start a speech, or this is always the way you should close a speech, or this is always the way you should walk on a stage, move on a stage, then I would suggest finding a new teacher because your individual creativity is what is going to make it interesting. Your personality, your quirks, your uniqueness is going to make it compelling. And what you find helps you become a better, more connected performer is going to make you most connected. So to answer your question is yes, sometimes meeting as many people as you can before the presentation is phenomenal because you make a personal connection with them, you shake their hand, you look them in the eye, and you already have some connection as soon as you start. However, there might be some speeches that you give where you'd rather them not see you beforehand because the way that you deliver the opening. And then, of course, there are some gigs. I mean, if you're on the professional circuit and you're giving a speech for 5,000 people, it's a little bit hard to meet all 5,000 people. And then, of course, there are some times when if you meet people beforehand and you spend too much time talking to them, you end up getting into a conversation about your whole speech. And then you end up, then you just talk to them. Then they give you, well, I don't know about that. What about this? And now you're all of a sudden in a sort of debate about, some topic. And that's not the place you want to be in going into the speech. So when I give a Book Yourself Solid speech, Book Yourself Solid was my first book. I try to meet as many audience members as I can beforehand. I walk the audience, I shake hands, I say hi, give people hugs when they'll accept them. And then when I start, there's this real natural, easy progression into the speech. And people also feel like, oh, he's just a regular dude like me, which I am. But sometimes when you write books and you give speeches, people make a disconnect. They go, oh, well, he knows so much more. He's so much this, or I couldn't be like, we don't want to think like that. It's not true. So we're much more similar than we are different. That's the way I see the world. So when I give the Think Big Revolution speech, however, I don't see the audience beforehand because it has a more theatrical feel. And the way that I open it is surprising. So I want that to be the first experience they have with me. Now, these are choices. And the performer makes choices early and often. People who make choices are compelling. People who don't make choices, who perseverate, are generally not as compelling because not a lot happens when you don't make many choices. Now, choosing early and often is different than choosing quickly and without much thought. But when you're performing, you're making choices. You're saying, I am going to go and meet all the people in the audience for this particular reason. You don't just on a whim, maybe you meet them, maybe you don't. You know what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. You know how you're opening. You know how you're closing. You know how you're doing what you're doing because you've made choices. And if you leave it to the unknown, then you may hit it sometimes, but you will often miss it. So remember, preparation and improvisation, when they are used in equal proportion, that's when you get authentic, spontaneous behavior in a manufactured environment.
And do you prefer to get rebooked, or do you like to do a show once and deliver all your best work and leave it at that?
I'll take what I can get. I'm not no, I'm just kidding. I love to get rebooked. Rebooked is great because you get to serve the same people. You develop a relationship. Now, I'm not going to create a new keynote just because someone asked me to do it for a one-off. I'm not going to do that. It's just not a smart business choice for me. When I take each opportunity and run it through my opportunity intake filter, there are a number of different metrics that I consider. And one of them is, what's the profitability? Is this a smart business decision? And what I've found over the years as a professional speaker is that if you constantly are recreating your material for each different gig, you're going to be, at least I can only speak for myself in this case, and I can speak for my clients, is that you end up in this middle zone, in this no man's land, where you're pulling it out, but it's not your great stuff. And you're working much harder than you need to work. And we want to do everything we need to do and can do to be best in class, but we don't want to do unnecessary work in a business because then our business is not necessarily a very viable business.
Especially if you're doing 400 hours of rehearsal for each keynote presentation.
Well, that's what happens is you end up not being able to do much preparation, and you end up winging it a lot. So one of the things that I suggest people do if they're asked to speak on a topic that they know a lot about and they think they could add value, but they don't necessarily speak on it a lot, or it's a slightly different approach than what you typically speak on and have prepared, ask to do it as an interview. You sit down with a host on stage and you do it as an interview, and people love that. Some of the most, when I do Heroic Public Speaking Live in February in Florida, it's a big event, and I have lots of different teachers, voice teachers, movement teachers, improvisation teachers come in from the Yale School of Drama, from NYU's graduate acting program. Of course, I teach, I do the master classes on public speaking, coaching live in front of other people. We teach content creation and storytelling and on-camera work and so much more. But we also do panels with some of the top speakers and agents, bureau people in the business. Rather than having somebody come in and give a speech on how to succeed in the business, we find that these panels are so effective because they're so relevant to the questions that are asked. And because you get these different opinions in the panels, you get a lot of really great information. And of course, the panels need to be curated well so that you have the right people on the panels together, and you need a great host. But it's one of the ways that you can have a great experience with an audience and deliver on the promises that you make to them. And it's very authentic. And it allows you to go back again and again without having to put together another keynote every single time you go back.
That's fantastic. It's an interesting segue that I'd like to take into the online world. What do you do that's consciously different when you're doing a podcast or a webinar compared to what you're doing live on stage?
Let's start with podcasting because we're doing that. So podcasting is interesting. When I do my own podcast, the first 45 episodes I did were all me, nobody else, just me teaching different concepts from the book Steal the Show, because I launched that podcast as part of the marketing strategy. So the idea was, all right, here's a podcast. You can listen to this. If you like this stuff, then you'll want to go buy the book. And that's how I started it. And I said, listen, I don't know if I'm going to do this after the launch is done, but while I do the launch, I'll give you 45 episodes, over the first 8 weeks. And then I loved it. So I said, I'm going to keep doing this. And now I'm bringing in guests. So your role as an interviewer is different than an interviewee. So the first thing we do is we need to determine what's our role. What's our responsibility in that role? How do we want to play that role? And it will be different if you're an interviewer, and it'll be different if you're the interviewee. And now that I am going back and forth between those, historically I've always been the interviewee, and I still do more of that than interviewing, but it's a real mind shift. It does take a very conscious effort to change my behavior in that other role. So that's what we do first. And the same thing is true on video. Now, of course, when you're on audio, you can do anything you want physically that nobody sees. But if you're on video, then you can't. You can't get up and walk around. You've got to be right there in front of the camera. Now, here I can't get up and walk around either. My microphone is stationary. But if you were wearing a microphone that I've actually done it once where I used lavaliers and I was walking around doing the podcast and I still had great sound because I have very high quality lavaliers, which was actually quite fun. But then I said, you know what, I'm going to end up cleaning the garage during a podcast, and that's not going to be a good idea. So I'm just going to stay put at my desk. But nonetheless, if you wanted to have notes, you could have notes. I don't, but you could if you wanted to. You don't have to look in any particular place. You can fidget with things. Sometimes fidgeting with things is actually quite helpful because your nervous energy gets put into that, and then it moves out of the rest of your body. But you're not going to do that when you're on video. So you have to then work on the use of your body in a different way. So how do you stay very relaxed and still at the same time without being stiff? So your movement is comfortable, making sure that you know that you're not taking up the frame with your hands. but still using your hands because they're connected to your body and they help you express yourself. Moving too fast in front of a video camera when you're live streaming is problematic because often the frame rate can't keep up and starts to look a little bit fuzzy or pixelated. But if you're shooting a DSLR video, high quality, well, then no problem. You can move as fast as you want, as long as you're not distracting or freaking people out. Then, of course, you got to make sure that you stay in frame properly. But if you're doing video recording and you're looking at your screen or doing a live stream, but your screen is below you, then the angle is often poor. Or if you have a webcam that's separate from your computer, but you're looking at the person's video that you're talking to on your computer, then you don't even look like you're looking at the camera. But the work you're doing on video is for the viewer at home. It's not for the interviewer on the other side of Skype. So in my video, I have an audio studio and I have a video studio. In the audio studio, we have a number of mics set up and connected to the preamps and then computers. But in the video studio, and it's like a basement. It's not like a basement. It is a basement office studio, audio studio. So it's pretty bare bones down here. But in my video studio upstairs is a really nice set. So there's really beautiful chairs and there's very specific art on the walls. So those are choices because they're seen. And then the way we frame the shot is a specific choice. And sometimes I'll frame it as a wide shot so you see more of the background and all of me sitting in the chair. Or if it's Amy and I, you see both of us. Or I'll frame it in tighter if it's just me, if it is going to be a little bit more intimate interview that is about personal philosophy rather than, say, public speaking technique or marketing technique, etc., where I might bring it back and have a little bit of a wider shot because I want them to see more of my body physically engaged because we're walking through pros and systems and it's a little more technical. So these are choices that you make. So you remember earlier on I mentioned that the choices you make are very important as a performer. They tell the world something about you. They influence the way that you're perceived. And each of these mediums have different considerations. And then I find that I will then bring a different energy to different shows depending on the topic of the show, the audience of the show, the host of the show. And some hosts are very controlling. Others are very open. You are a very open host. You are one of the few hosts who really allows the guests to talk. Now, I hope that you're letting me talk because what I'm saying is relevant to your audience. And that if I was going off on some random tangent, I started talking about, I don't know, the methodology I use for cleaning my car, you'd get me back on topic and to something that was relevant. But that's a very unique way of being. Sometimes when I'm on a podcast, if I pause for even a split second, the host will jump in there. Either A, because they want the show to be as much about them as they do about the guest, or because they think I'm done. But power, when you're performing, is often in the pause. When you're on audio and you're not sitting with somebody recording, when you pause for a long period of time, they think you're done and they jump in, but you may not be done. So I pause less frequently when I'm doing audio, radio, podcasting, etc., because often then I can't finish my point because I get cut off. But if I'm on video, I can do that. I can also do it by showing a hand gesture that I'm just pausing for a second. You can see physically based on how somebody is moving, even if they're sitting down, their expression on their face, whether or not they're pausing and are going to continue or whether or not they're done. So you see how each of these mediums have different considerations. And sometimes if I have a host who I know really cuts you off a lot, I'll say to them before the interview, I'll say, listen, often I pause so that the audience can consume what I have to say. Make it a real important point. So what I'll do when I'm finished with something is I'll say either back to you, like they do on the news, or I'll ask a question and say, so is that clear to you? I generally would prefer not to do that but it does help cue them. Now, when I listen to some of your work before this one, and I try to do that each time I do an interview, sometimes it's not possible when the schedule's just really booked, but I listened to it and I heard your style, and I know that's a guy that will allow the pause to exist. And I thought, cool, so I don't have to say anything to him.
It was your book that was teaching the importance of the pause and the fact that it is often uncomfortable, but especially as a speaker, that it's firstly important for the audience to digest what you're saying, but secondly, that a lot of good stuff actually comes after pauses. And I've been trying my best to hold back and to let the pause of your pauses sit and really wait for you to finish what it is that you're saying. So I've really enjoyed your long, detailed answers here, Michael.
Oh, thank you. That's the power of the pause. So often people will be told to slow down when they're presenting, and there's merit in that. Sometimes that makes sense. Often the more effective advice would be to encourage them to pause, because speaking quickly is not a problem. In fact, speaking quickly is often more effective because there are a lot of things that you say that is just material to get you to the big point. It needs to be said. It's not filler. It needs to be said. However, it's what gets you to the point. And then the pause comes after the point, so it has more impact. But let's just say I slowed everything down, okay? So I said, and this is how I answered. Adam, the answer to your question is twofold. One, you'd be like, oh my God.
I definitely have to see you up there. I'll say, mate, come on.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much. And you'd end the interview. That'd be it. You'd be done. So that's the thing. Contrast is what's interesting to people. So timing contrast, pacing contrast, volume contrast, pitch contrast, anything that's the same for a long, 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 long period of time tends to wear on an audience. So even the most beautiful note on the violin, after about 10 minutes, might have you run screaming from the theater. So the contrast is what's very interesting to audiences. And also, you're driving to your point. You're moving. You're trying to get to what's important. So I'm not suggesting anyone should have the kind of pacing that I do, or you do, or anyone else does. Each one of us should exploit our own natural style. But if our natural style is not developed in such a way that it is compelling to an audience, then we want to work on that. We're not going to imitate somebody else. We're not going to say, oh, I'm going to speak like Michael, or I'm going to speak like Adam. That would, of course, be just an imitation. You'd be a facsimile of somebody else.
So there's two more questions I'm hoping to ask, if that's all right with you, Michael.
No, that's horrible. That's terrible. Adam, I can't believe you're going to ask me two more questions.
Well, if it's
fine. Okay. You can do it.
Okay, great. So the book Steal the Show, obviously it's about stealing the show, but a lot of what you do happens before you take the stage. Now, not just the MC's introduction, but bios and maybe handouts, maybe stuff that is done in terms of videos to promote the event. What are some of the things that professional speakers or performers, or I guess non-professional speakers, can do to prepare themselves and prepare the audience so that they can steal the show?
First of all, let me commend you. You're asking really insightful questions, and you've actually read the book.
Yeah, and I study your work, Michael. I love it.
That's great. I'd say there are a good percentage of the podcasts I've been on where the host didn't actually read the book. And I always find it's interesting, but often more compelling when the host is really well prepared. So I mention that now because you're asking about preparation for the actual performance. A little different than rehearsal. You're talking about the kinds of interaction you have with an audience before you actually open your mouth.
Yes. And
people often think that their speech starts when they do open their mouth. And in fact, what they will often do is they will do a bunch of filler at the beginning, like, oh, hey, I'm really tired. My arms are really tired. I just flew in from Duluth. I don't know. It's terrible.
I know the type.
Well, jokes. Yeah. And then so they'll do a few minutes of filler, and then they'll go, okay, let's get started. Well, it started already. And when you say let's get started, it suggests to the audience that whatever happened before that was just a waste of time. So if the audience has had no interaction with you ever, they've never seen anything about you, it starts as soon as your bio is read. Your bio is the very first component of your speech, and it needs to be integrated into the speech. If there was a brochure and your bio and description of your presentation was in there, that's when your speech started. If you did videos that were promotional videos for the speech that you're going to give, and those are the first things they saw, that's when you're started. If you did surveys of the people who are going to be in the audience prior to the speech so that you learned a lot about them so you could tailor your speech to them, and that's the first interaction they had with you, that's when your speech started. So we're trying to integrate all of these different elements, and we think about those elements as it relates to the promise that we're trying to deliver, to the tone that we're trying to set, to the experience that we're trying to create. And then when you open your mouth, it's just an extension of all of these things that have come before, and you're actually already into your speech. Now just comes the verbal part, or the in-person verbal part. I think the speech starts when you have your first meeting with the people who have chosen you to give the speech to talk about the content of the speech, because they're going to go and spread throughout their organization messages about you and what you're going to be coming to speak about. So it starts all the way back there.
And if I can have part B of this question, what could we be doing or should we be doing after you've been clapped, or hopefully clapped or given a standing ovation after your speech, but beyond the presentation?
Well, first, I'd say get off the stage. That's always a good idea.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's a good idea. But I say that because sometimes we will end the speech, they'll start clapping, and then we'll go, oh, wait, one more thing. And then we try to close again, and the next close is kind of weak because they feel like, well, I've already done the clapping. I don't want to do this all over again. It's not like an encore that a comedian, gets. It's a little bit different than that. So make sure you know exactly when you're going to end, that it's clear it's over. You take a bow, they clap, thank you very much, and you leave the stage with power. It's very different than okay, so I guess my time's up. And all right, thanks. People are like, okay. And then you're kind of like, I'm standing up here looking around. Should I guess nobody's coming up. So, okay, I guess I'll walk down. Should I walk down that way? So all of those things are soft, we want clarity. Clarity is what people love when it's going to end, when it's going to start, and throughout, of course. So you take your bow and you get off. Now, of course, there are things you can do that will take that speech forward. You may have done something in the speech that has encouraged people to, join a newsletter list, or to do something else with you, or to meet you at the booth where you're going to be signing books if you're an author, or just out in the hall, or, hey, listen, I'm going to be at the bar. I'm not buying drinks. You're buying me drinks, but I'll see you over there at 5 o'clock. Whatever.
That's a good call to action.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, buying drinks would be a good call to action. I'm buying drinks for everybody. All you have to do is be in the bar 10 minutes from now. So there are things we can do afterwards. And then there are, of course, action plans that we can give them, that they can, follow through on, that they can move forward with. There's a lot of different things we can do afterwards that will keep the momentum going.
Awesome. All right. Now, final question before I'll let you share how people can find out more about the book. But I really loved the tip that you gave in the book. And you said you hadn't seen anyone else do it to date, but you suspected people would now that you had published it. But that was actually clicking through the slides as the MC was reading out your bio. And I absolutely loved it. So firstly, with your permission, I might test that out myself if that's okay.
You don't need my permission. It's not, look, I started doing it because I realized that even if your bio's interesting, often people don't listen to it. They still have their heads down in their phone finishing up a last email. And they say, oh, well, I'll look up when the speaker gets up there. But the bio is important because it's setting a tone and it's demonstrating to the audience that you know what they want to know. It demonstrates to the audience that they should be listening to you because of X, Y, and Z. And also, generally, the shorter your bio, the more impressive you are. The longer your bio, the less impressive you are when it comes to speech introductions. For example, Bill Gates. If I was introducing Bill Gates, I don't think I'd need to say more than, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Gates. I don't need to say, Bill Gates founded Microsoft in 19 blah, blah, blah. They'd be like, yeah, okay, got that, knew that. So those things are not relevant when you're really famous. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. That's all you need for the President of the United States. But if it's somebody, you don't know, you need some more information to make sure that they know that you know what they want to know. But if they're not listening to it, then you miss that opportunity. And then when you start speaking, they're listening going, should I pay attention? Should I be listening to this person? I don't know. Let me see. So they reserve judgment, and you don't want to take time, you don't want them to take time reserving judgment. You want them to be with you as soon as possible. So what I started doing was doing a slideshow during the bio, but not during the speech. And I would advance the slideshow myself. And what it also did is it also helped ensure that they would read the bio I gave them. Because, oh my God, in the early days, I can't tell you how many bios of mine were destroyed. You ask anybody who's given speeches, has your bio ever been completely mangled? Yes. John Jantz, my friend John Jantz, was once introduced as David Meerman Scott. No, he was introduced as John Jantz, but the books that he supposedly written were David's, not his.
That's great.
And he was thinking, wait, should I tell them? These things. And often, when they read something about you that's wrong, and then you have to qualify it at the beginning, now you're in a bad place. Or they just leave out a whole bunch of things that are really important. Then you're like, well, I kind of needed them to know that for the speech. And then all of a sudden you're saying, and you look like you're talking about yourself, which is generally not, what you should be doing. For example, sometimes on podcasts, hosts will say, okay, so tell the audience about yourself. I don't love that. Because then you're put in this position where you're supposed to demonstrate that you know what they know. It's very different than saying, so tell us a little bit about how you got into what you do. Or what's something that is not in your bio that the audience doesn't know about you. Those things give the speaker something to work with. But if they have to say, well, I've written, if I have to go listen, I've written 6 books, I'm a New York Times bestseller, a Wall Street Journal bestseller, Wall Street Journal marketing guru, I sound like an ass. But if it's in the bio read by somebody else, it comes across much better because everybody knows that we wrote the bios for the host. That's a convention that people accept. But if somebody else reads it, it's more acceptable, it's more palatable. And you don't want to be proving yourself at the beginning of a presentation or a speech. So with that said, they read the bio and then I advance the slide. So if it says Michael Port is a New York Times bestselling author of 6 books, boom, they'll see a slide with me in all the books. They go, oh, I guess that's true. Okay. And then, they might say the Boston Globe called him this, the Wall Street Journal called him this, the Financial Times called him this, etc. And then you start to see those things. They go, oh, I guess those things are true too. And they say, not only has Michael done this, he also was once a professional actor. And he was on shows like Sex and the City, Third Watch, All My Children. And all of a sudden you start to see me on the screen with Sarah Jessica Parker, with Daniel Day Kim, with Michael Hall, with all these people that are very, very well known on all these shows. And they go, oh, I guess those things are true. He wasn't an extra in the back picking up garbage. He was actually on those shows. It's true. Huh. And they said, but now you'll see him on MSNBC and CNBC and PBS and these as an on-air commentator on communications and business development. And then they see pictures of me on those sets, actually behind the desk. So they go, oh, I guess that's true too. Because people are more likely to believe it if they see it as opposed to just hearing it.
I really, really like that. I'm going to give that a go.
You should do it. Show it to me. I'd love to see if someone films the event when you do it. I'd love to see it. I think it'd be great. I want to compile these cool things that people do based on suggestions from Steal the Show so that I can show others, look how great this is. Look how cool this is. It'll be inspiring.
All right, I'll do that. I've got a presentation in 2 days' time. I'll get someone to videotape the opening.
Awesome. That's so cool.
It through to you. I want to implement that idea. Look, I could speak with you all day, Michael. I absolutely love your work, and I'm a professional speaker myself, so I've studied a lot of your work, and I found it so incredibly valuable. But I do encourage listeners to get the book. We'll be having a copy of the book to give away to somebody who responds to the newsletter that I'll be sending out or leaves a comment in the comment section. I'm going to decide on what the rules for that little contest will be. But Michael, where can people go to find out more about the book?
Well, the book is anywhere books are sold. So, of course, Amazon is a great place, always the best price at Amazon. And if you want bonuses, when you buy the book, you can go to stealtheshow.com. Stealtheshow.com. So when you buy a copy of the book and you show us your order number, then we give you a free documentary masterclass series, templates for creating content and crafting stories and much more. So that's a great way to get started as a speaker, and the book will help you do that, of course, as well. And then if you want to learn more about public speaking and see what kind of events we're having and online courses we offer, go to heroicpublicspeaking.com. heroicpublicspeaking.com. And may I say, Adam, and I'm not pandering to the Aussies, but I think that the Aussies are generally more friendly and warm than the Americans. I'm just saying.
Well, you're always welcome down under, Michael.
Thank you so much. You know, my first corporate presentation of the Think Big Revolution was in Sydney.
Interesting.
Yeah, at the big convention center. There was about 3,500 people, maybe 4,000 people. It was a great experience. And, you know, the Aussies, different cultures behave differently in the theater. So it's important if you're traveling internationally as a speaker to learn about the culture. And I'd spoken in Australia once before, and I talked to other speakers who were Australian to, you know, get a sense like, what is the audience like? Because I do, in that particular speech, there's a fair amount of audience interaction. And there's a dance sequence at the end, which is incredibly fun, where I bring in professionals. I had 5 dancers on stage at the end, professionals, and they do a choreographed dance that the audience does with them. And that's, you know, not easy to get an audience to do that. And that's why it's at the end, because all audience interaction must be proportionate to the amount of trust that you've earned. So I wouldn't have them dance in the first 5 minutes because they'd be like, what? Excuse me? You're asking me what? Yeah, I'm not asking them to do a hula dance or anything. It's just a fun few steps that gets them moving and is quite an experience. But it's at the end. And the reason I mention it is because, you know, will the Australians jump up and do that as fast as the Americans? I don't know. There's another part where I ask people to stand up, raise their hand, and share what they stand for. Well, you know, before I did it in front of 4,000 people, I had to ask, well, will somebody do that in front of 4,000 people? And will the Australians do that as quickly as the Americans? And the one that most folks in Australia warned me about was the standing up and saying what they stand for. That was something that they didn't know if I could get the audience to do, because I ask a lot of people to do that in a very short period of time. And it worked. It worked wonderfully. So I called up all my Aussie speaker friends and I said, come on, you got to give them some credit. They had a great time. They did it. Same thing. I went and spoke at an event in the States for 850 ultra-Orthodox Jews. So the black hats, different sects there's Lubavitcher, the Hasidic, there's different sects there. And what I was told is they do not interact at all. So don't expect interaction. I said, that's ridiculous. Forget about it. And they interacted the whole time, and it was incredibly fun. But what happens is sometimes we get an idea about a group because we haven't seen them do something very often in the past. And so we make this assumption that that's always how they'll behave. But I don't think that we necessarily have to submit to common practices. Because the performer's job is sometimes to break the rules. Not to break the rules just to be rebellious, but to break the rules to create something better than existed before. And we're walking that fine line between, okay, what is okay for that culture and what's not okay for that culture? And where do I want to try to advance the experience? So with that ultra-Orthodox group, cursing was an absolute no-no. So this was not something that I was going to go in and go, you know what? I'm going to see if I can curse. That would be ridiculous. But some interaction was what I wanted for a variety of reasons. So that's where I wanted to challenge a little bit, to push a little bit. And I'm not saying to them, listen, I'm going to challenge you to interact. I'm not going to do that. That's not a kind of dynamic you want to set up. But of course, I'm not going to go in there and curse. It'd be completely unacceptable. So you see what I'm saying.
Michael, do you find what main difference do you find between an Aussie audience and an American and a USA audience when you're speaking live from stage?
Generally, the Aussie audience is a little more laid back. The American audience wants to be a part of it more, meaning the American audience, a lot of people in that audience would rather be the one on stage.
Mm-hmm.
The Aussies are like, yeah, I'm cool to be here. There's no problem. I'm enjoying my seat. I find them a little less, and this is again a total generalization, but I find them as an audience a little less self-absorbed. And what happens actually is then they become actually a little more passive as an audience, whereas American audiences tend to be a little bit more active. And it doesn't make it sometimes we obsess about the audience's reaction. We think, oh, they didn't give a standing ovation. That means they hated it. Well, no, actually, it could have been profoundly moving to them in such a way that they had to sit there and think at the end. And that's great. So we don't want to make too many assumptions about an audience. We want to learn as much as we can about them so that we can work within the norm, within what is typical. But then if there's something that we want to do with them because we think it'll help deliver on the promise of our presentation, then we might want to push that envelope a little bit.
And do you find, even after all these years of speaking from stage and on TV, that you still watch other speakers and learn from them?
Oh my God, all the time. Absolutely. All the time, without a doubt.
Awesome. That's what I thought you might say. I love nothing more than observing other speakers, not just for their content, but all the little things that they do and the things that you can pick up on and maybe implement and test out yourself. It's just such a fascinating world, delivering speeches and watching speeches. And in my opinion, you're the master. So look, Michael, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, and you have yourself a fantastic day over your side of the world.
Thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate it. So pleased to be able to be of service. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that is a wrap for my chat with Michael Port. Very, very exciting to have him on the show. And I could have spoken with him for a lot longer. It had already hit the hour and 10 mark, and I just had more to ask. But look, what I personally got out of that is that no matter how you approach public speaking, whether it's public to a group of 2 people or public to a group of 2,000 people, or whether it's online or through a podcast like this or live on stage, I was most impressed by the fact that there seems to be so many different ways to approach it and so many ways that we can put our own twist on it or our own flavor on it, that it doesn't have to be, oh, you're doing it the right way or you're doing it the wrong way. So that was one of the awesome things. Of course, the part I love the most that I'm going to implement that I shared is actually clicking, or experiment with it anyway, is to click through my slides as the MC is reading out my bio. And luckily I've got an opportunity to practice that 2 days from now, the time of recording. And I think it'll work well. I've just done the slides straight after the interview, and I've made a note to close the loop with Michael and send in that video. So that's what I'm going to take out of it. I totally agree with his advice on rehearsing. I remember in the early days, I would rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. I remember doing it downstairs, literally from start to finish, dozens and dozens of times, because I guess I wanted to be a professional speaker. It wasn't just something that I had to do and I have to just do like a talk at a conference and hated it. I actually set out to certainly start off doing some free ones to cut my teeth and to practice, but I really wanted to be professional. I wanted to be able to share some of the stuff that Tobes and I have learnt in our business and convey that to people and pass it on, because the web and social media can be so confusing, so overwhelming, so daunting to people that are new to it and people that haven't experienced it yet. But it doesn't have to be confusing, and it shouldn't be confusing. And one of the things I love is seeing people in the audience realize that, oh, that's just like real life. There's things I do in real life, and now I know the social media equivalent, or now I know the online marketing equivalent. And seeing that penny drop is really rewarding for me. And so too is seeing people actually take action. Like I run this competition normally during my speeches where people can tweet me. They take a photograph of our notes and they tweet me at the end. Now that is enough incentive, well hopefully it's enough incentive for people to take notes in the first place. But it's interesting because there's always a whole bunch of people that actually sign up for Twitter. And I can tell that because they've got 0 followers, or they might still have that egghead thing on. But it's great because I can then interact with them. I can congratulate them on taking that first step. And at the end of the day, it's taking that first step that's often the hardest. Once they get on to, say, Twitter, and they've had an interaction with me, and they can find other people they might be interested in following, then that's that first little bit of the momentum. It's the first action, it's the first step that they take, and that's how momentum builds like a snowball. And if I can help them through a talk, whether it's a webinar or even a podcast like this, but mainly the on-stage stuff, if I can actually help people take that first step and not be scared by the web and not be scared by social media, that gives me a huge thrill. And of course, it's nice to get the commercial outcomes from it as well, whether it's a speaking fee or whether it's ongoing work from people signing up to our courses. That's all a great bonus, but it is just seeing that transformation, those first steps that people take, that keeps me coming back. And even though very often my presentations are 90% the same, I'll tailor maybe 10% of it to suit the specific audience, but it means it's a great opportunity to be practicing these stories and improving how I tell them and relating stuff that is important for the audience to wrap their head around, but I can each and every time practice it privately and then do it publicly and see if it improves. And I really find that part of public speaking really enjoyable too. So look, that is a long episode. Thank you for staying with me through to the end. As you know, the show is brought to you by our book, which has 33 free marketing templates, including a speaker's social media template. It's a checklist of all the things that I like to do with social media, both before, during, and after a talk. So that is one of the 33 templates you can download at bluewire.com.au/book. If you've got feedback, I welcome that. You can tweet me at Franklin_Adam or email me adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au. And I really hope you found that interview as insightful and useful as I did. Certainly my intention with these interviews is to share good quality guests who have great insights that we can implement. That was certainly the case for me. And if you did enjoy the show, I would certainly be very appreciative if you could take the time to leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher, because it really does increase our visibility. It allows us to attract good quality guests like Michael, and it feels good to get a nice review as well. So thank you very much, and I will see you on the next show. Bye.